He's really done a remarkable job in doing that, and I want to give all the credit to the search committee who hired Matt back in 2010, which I led, as a matter of fact. So, Matt Shay.
We need disruption. We need to shake up the status quo and usher in the next generation of innovative solutions.
The National Retail Federation is the world's largest retail trade association.
The value of NRF is that we have one strong, powerful voice.
The only place I go for continuing professional education is the NRF. There's something for everyone there.
The NRF events have helped both my career and my business. Being able to tap into that expertise and knowledge is pretty powerful.
We have access to resources that really give us insight.
The disruption is taking place with a level of velocity that is unlike anything we've seen before, and that's true online, brick and mortar. It's all part of retail.
The NRF, in one word, to me, is community. You meet with them and they speak to you and you get together with them over time. To me, those connections are the most important thing about NRF.
They've made my career exactly what it is, knowing that people are investing and believing in our future. It's such a dream that the NRF has made come true, and I'm so thankful for that.
Retail is going to need great talent in the future, and the role that the NRF is playing to bring them along and to show them what's possible in retail is very important.
Good morning. It's great to be here and be back again at the Global Retailing Conference, and so thank you to Terry and the entire team at the Lundgren Center for the invitation to be back. I've been, I think of the 9 years, I thought Terry was going to bury the lead and not take credit for actually hiring me, but I thought after all the great things he said about the work we've done, he should take credit because he deserves it, and so I'm glad he did. He's invited me on a couple of occasions in the past. And I think several years ago I spoke. I think I've made 4 or 5 out of the last 9. So it's always great to be here. And as Terry said, alluding to the others that have spoken in past years, when this really took off about a decade ago, and he started to put the strong arm on some of his pals, and right up to the program this week, it is a huge honor to be on a stage that has welcomed so many incredible leaders in the retail industry, starting, of course, with Terry himself. And he had to go run down the hall and introduce Doug McMillan, and he's going to come back. So I'm saving up some other comments about Terry until he gets back in the room, because it won't be any fun if he's not here to hear them. But I will say for everyone, and I think most people know this, but the man is a legend. The man that was just up here is an incredible leader, and has stepped up for the companies he's represented and stepped up for the industry time and time again. And, he will go down in history when we're all long gone as one of the most legendary retail executives ever, period. I believe that very strongly. So the fact that he lends his name to this institution, these events, I think is terrific. And that's why it's such a huge honor for me to be up here today. And Terry really was instrumental hiring one guy as the chair of the search committee. Certainly, I think, contributed somewhat. But more than that, simply being involved in the NRF over the years and lending himself to the organization helped us create an environment in which the NRF can be successful on behalf of its member companies. And so I thought what I would do this morning is spend a few minutes talking about some of the ways in which we represent the industry and sort of in a few sections talk about, first of all, what's the current state of the industry as we see it. Where are we today? And Terry did a great setup talking about from an operating perspective and a retailer's perspective what's happening with consumer behavior, consumer expectations, changes in the business model. So I'll talk about just a little setup on what we see, where we are today, and then talk about how we use the platform that we have to tell the story of the industry and give you some examples of ways in which we do that. And then I want to mention what we do to try to set the record straight so people really understand what's happening. Terry alluded to it. It's a very disruptive, highly complex environment in which retailers are operating. Not everyone gets that. Frequently members of the media, the analyst community, the investor community don't understand what's happening. They get the narrative wrong. We're constantly out there trying to set the record straight. And I'll talk about some of our advocacy activities that I think, and obviously I have a conflict of interest because I think the NRF has been effective in that area because of what I do every day. But I think our member companies and I think the peer groups in Washington and the people on Capitol Hill and at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, other places would say the NRF is an effective voice on advocacy. And so I'll give you maybe a few examples of some of those more prominent issues over the past couple of years. And then finally just spend a couple of minutes talking about what we think is going to happen in the near term and maybe the intermediate term in terms of the future of the industry. So if that makes sense, let me just start with our perspective on where we are as an industry in terms of the role we play in the economy. And Terry alluded to some of this, but the retail industry is the nation's largest private sector employer, creating 1 in 4 jobs, 42 million jobs for Americans. That $2.6 trillion in GDP is about 20% of the nation's GDP. So when Terry said 70% is consumption, we're talking about 20% of all GDP activity. Now, these are numbers that didn't exist until 2010. They were out there, but no one had ever aggregated them. And so we undertook a study that we ended up calling in a campaign called Retail Means Jobs because it was the middle of the recession and no one was talking about the role of the retail industry and job creation until Terry came along and said NRF should do that. And we commissioned this research, had never been done before, and this kind of gave us a baseline to have a conversation, create a calling card. So we know how big the industry is in job employment. So what do we see in terms of growth? And I know Sarah's going to talk about that when she comes up. A lot of people wouldn't believe that first line, that retail's grown faster than GDP over the last 2.5 years, because the analysis is frequently incorrect, or the conclusions that get drawn from the disruptive environment by those that make observations about the health of the industry, which is a nice way of saying a bunch of people are uninformed and they get it wrong. They don't get this. They don't understand it because it's a complex environment with a great deal of disruption. Many people would not have guessed that second line. The retail sales grew last year 4.6%. That is a heck of a great year for any industry. Faster than the economy grew. So the retail industry is growing. Now, it's obviously not distributed evenly. TL referred to that too. Not every company is going to outperform the market. Just like your stock portfolio, you can't always beat the benchmark. Many companies are, some companies are not. So that's part of the conversation. And then as we look ahead to this year, we see that sales are going to continue to grow. And this year's not going to be the same kind of year that last year was for a number of reasons, and we could talk about that. There's some natural sort of slowing in the economy that's taking place, and we had tax reform really hit last year. A number of other factors, consumer confidence extremely high, which, by the way, remains very high relative to historic norms. So we think we're positioned for a pretty good year this year, and that 3.8 to 4.4 growth is something that we should think is a positive outcome. So let's not be self-defeatist and say, oh, it's not going to be as good as last year. That's a good year, and if we can avoid some self-inflicted wounds, we think we'll get there. And I'll come back to that and talk about that when we get nearer to the conversation about the future. So how do we tell the story? And how do we think about using our platform? Well, part of what's happening is we know, and Terry alluded to this, that the environment is changing. And this is a big component of that change. So let me break this down for you a little bit. On the outside, on each edge, in the reddish shaded and the gold yellow shaded, that's 2017. Inside of that is 2018. And those are by channels. So in-store only and online only. It continues to come down. People shop in a single channel less frequently, and more people converging there in the middle. And you can see just in 1 year, this is, by the way, a snapshot of Thanksgiving weekend, when we have, I know, Bill, 150, 170 million people shopping over those 4 days from Black Friday to Cyber Monday, or including Thanksgiving. So this is a really big number. It's a moment in time. But it shows you just in 1 year, the number of multi-channel shoppers increased from 37 to 54%, and making it the first year, 2018, in which more than half of all shoppers on that weekend were multi-channel shoppers. So if we were able to expand that slide and go back to 2010, think what you would see is in each, I think of it as an end zone, or if you play soccer, think of it as a soccer pitch and the two goals. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there was a game being played at one end of the field and another game at the other end of the field. And there were all the bricks and mortar on one side and all the online on the other side. The game today is in the middle of the field. That's where it's getting played, and this slide bears that out. That's where people shop. Recognizing it's 90 and 10 in terms of the percentages of sales between stores and online. Terry had a great slide on that. But this is where people are going. This is what customers do. And this is hard for some in the analyst community, the media community, investors. That's hard for them to understand that this doesn't mean that retail is dying, because that's what got talked about in 2016. Q4 of 16, Q1 of 17, that's all people talked about was the death of retail apocalypse, if you can go back just 2 years and think about it. And so this represents the transformation that's taking place against the backdrop of those amazing job numbers and that incredible annual year-over-year growth. So telling the story in an environment like that. So we think of the NRF as a very smart and talented CEO of another successful association told me years ago, think of it as a platform to deliver a message. Your industry is the platform. So how do you use the industry that creates all these opportunities to empower that industry and tell the story more effectively? And a lot of that begins with ensuring you've got the right messages and that you're delivering them to the right people and that you've got the right information as the basis for that message. Now, we can't persuade 300 million Americans or all 15 million college students in the United States or every academic at every institution across the country or every one of the many thousands and thousands of elected leaders in state legislatures and on Capitol Hill. We can't persuade and reach every single one of those. We can't boil the ocean, respectively, in each of those categories. So we try to identify influencers in each category and then create relationships with them through programs and activities. And we've been very successful in doing that with our Retail Advocates Summit, when we bring several hundred retailers to Washington to go to Capitol Hill. Our Academic Summit, when we invite several hundred academics, and not academics that come out of the retail schools who are already believers in retail, but we invite people from the general business school, not the retail school, finance, economics, technology, science, technology, engineering, math, and we talk to them about retail. So they'll go back and talk to their students, and instead of saying, oh yeah, you only want to go to work for Bain, or for AT&T, or for Google, you don't want to go to retail, it's a dead-end career. They talk about the opportunities in retail. So we try to influence those people and open their eyes to what's taking place. We have 1,000 students at our annual convention each year. We have more than 1,000 members of the media, the analyst community, investor community at our annual convention each year. We use the convention in January as a platform. There are 40,000 people there, a fourth of them from outside the United States, to tell the story of the industry and try to influence those influencers so that we can make progress in ensuring that the right story gets told. Now, just on this point about the data and the analytics that go into this, and Sarah will have an opinion about this too, because she's an economist by training and she understands all this stuff. And I've had the conversation with Steve Leisman, who's the economist at CNBC, and many others. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Terry had some BLS numbers up there, fascinating stuff, and the Department of the Census of Business, the numbers that they collect, both households and businesses, that talk about retail are based really on an outdated way of measuring what's retail. So for example, the BLS study that measures retail employment only counts a retail job as a retail job if that job is physically located at a place in which a retail sale takes place. So if you have a job in the retail industry, but you don't work in a store, you don't have a retail job. That's the way the BLS measures it. If it's a warehouse, if it's supply, if it's logistic, if it's merchandise and design, if it's digital, if it's anywhere other than Herald Square, you don't get counted. You don't get counted. And instead, all those jobs that retailers create in all those other categories get put in other categories. So not only do we get penalized and don't get the credit for the ones we have, the ones we create get given to someone else in another category, which simply makes it look worse. So we're working with Census, we're working with Commerce and BLS to change this. they understand they've got a problem. They don't really know how to fix it because it's like playing Jenga. If you pull it out of here and say, well, okay, it's not a warehouse, it's a retail, then what does that do to the warehouse shops? So you can imagine the complication of this. But it all goes really back to some of the points Terry made. The economy's changing, consumers are changing, things don't work the way they used to work. That doesn't mean that retail isn't successful, it just means we have to think about it differently. We need, as Jamie Nordstrom said a couple years ago, and others have said this, we need new metrics for retail. It's not just same-store sales. That's not the only or the primary way in which to measure the health and success of a retailer. So we're constantly having that conversation and trying to influence the influencers and make sure that people understand what's really happening. So what is happening? How do we set the record straight about what's really taking place in retail? Well, there's an enormous amount of innovation, and even apparently some dancing with robots, according to that slide. It was either early in the morning or it was right before happy hour. You can't see it as well as I can on the down monitor, but that is a robot. I think that's one that Intel brought and had on stage at our show 2 or 3 years ago with their then CEO. But, and there was just a question about AR and VR a couple minutes ago. And we all know about what's happening with voice, what's happening with machine learning and artificial intelligence, the way in which technology is transforming businesses. But I think, what we have to keep in mind is that, being consumer-centric or customer centricity, as we're talking about this week at the show, it's about using innovation for the right things. And so sometimes that means you've got to do things like reimagine the store. A couple of years ago, Terry was on this stage, although I think it was a year in which we were not at this property, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Do we have one on reimagining the store, or are we still on innovation? Oh, we've got convergence. That's what we talked about too, didn't we? And Terry had the clicker, and we all had a clicker in the audience. And Terry said, we're going to vote. Here are the 4 categories. One category, and you got to rank what's most important in the coming year. And one was mobile, one was e-commerce, one was logistics, and one was inventory management. Inventory management, snooze, right? Boring. So everybody clicked, everybody voted for something else. Inventory management was last on the list. Terry said, you're all wrong. It's inventory management. We got to think about how we use our 800 stores for fulfillment. So that's how we compete against companies in the e-commerce space. I've got a secret weapon that they don't have. Well, now everybody's doing that, right? How many people this year at the holidays did buy online, pick up on store? How many people did delivery direct from store, not just distribution centers? Terry was talking about this 5 years ago. So using stores differently, because we see the channels converging, we see shoppers thinking differently about the experience that they want. And we see that every day, and we talk about it at our show and our events. But at the end of the day, it really is about the fundamentals of the business. And I think that's investing in people and creating those experiences that are going to ensure that you get a seamless experience across all the channels, that in a world in which things have converged, that you can go back and forth between and among whichever of those channels you want to use at that moment in time. And I thought it was interesting that Terry was the 90-10 sort of, if you take the long view, there's been this incremental narrowing of the gap in terms of sales from stores and the percentage of overall retail sales that are being captured by online. And many millennials, if we ask them about how do they like to experience retail, and they talk about Thanksgiving weekend, 95%, 85, 90% enjoy going to the store. They like the experience. And that's why we see, now this is a slide of Warby Parker, if you can read it in the background, but you see companies that swore off, we will never open a store. And I'm not talking about Amazon. They've been in the retail business with bricks and mortar for a long time. I'm talking about Everlane and Wayfair and Rent the Runway and companies that realize, and Casper, and companies that realize that bricks and mortar is indispensable because it creates an experience. So yes, there needs to be some editing of the portfolio in terms of the real estate footprint to bring those things into alignment. But people aren't going to go away from stores. They're not going to go away from experience. because it is about the experience, and there are some things you can't get just from technology alone, one-dimensionally, on your iPad. You want to be in that store, and some is just convenience. You want to order it online, pick it up in store. So I think that's the other thing that we've seen an enormous amount of is, I guess Mark Laurie, who is Doug McMillan's global chief of e-commerce, Jet.com, among other very successful businesses. Mark Laurie spoke at our Shop.org, our digital summit in Los Angeles in September of 2017. And we were talking about AR, VR, and AI, and machine learning, and voice, and we happen to be talking specifically about voice. And Mark, who is one of those people that probably swore off I will never be in the real estate, in the bricks and mortar business, who's now in the biggest bricks and mortar business other than maybe the Catholic Church. There's nobody bigger than Walmart when it comes to bricks and mortar. And Mark said, a technology guy, a digital native, Mark said, but don't get distracted by the technology, by the AI, by the AR, VR, by the voice. Don't get distracted by that. Because at the end of the day, the technology exists to do one thing, and that's simply to make you a better merchant. And being a better merchant is about focusing on the fundamentals, and that's about putting the customer at the center of the experience. And I think that's the thing that, if we go back to the convergence of channels and the transformation, and the slide that was up a couple of minutes ago, and Q4 of 16 and Q1 and 2 of 17, the so-called apocalypse and the ice age, the people that didn't understand the transformation that was taking place, people were looking at caterpillars, they didn't realize they were butterflies at some point, right? They didn't understand the transition period that's going to take place. And I, like Terry, I've got my version of a sort of the disruptive timeline, and it's sort of the Moore's law of retail. And I would say in this country from, the 1800s from 1820 to 1920, there were general stores. That was 100 years. From 1920 to 1970, you saw the mass urban population of the major centers. You had 50 years. That was the era of the department store. My small town in small town farm country, Ohio, had John J. Carroll department store. Sometimes we got lucky, and a couple times a year we went to Columbus to Lazarus. Once we went to Higbee's in Cleveland. It was a big deal. Everybody had one. That was 50 years. Then you had the big boxes and the shopping malls for 25 years. It keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So we're in this period now, these last 5 years, where there's been this rapid acceleration and transformation in the industry, at the same time that we had more transparency in the industry as consumers than we've ever had before. That other stuff, over 100 years, no one noticed it because it was so gradual, right? Pony Express. And now it happens before your very eyes. In just a couple of years, things get changed. We debated inside the NRF with member companies. I didn't debate, argue. We really wondered, should we bother? In 2012, we talked to member companies about if we were going to create a blueprint for the use of mobile technology in sales, would that be interesting to you? And lots of them said no. And that was in 2012. No, mobile, it's not going to be that big a deal. How big a deal is mobile today, right? It's the deal. It's like, it's the flagship store when you pick up the phone. That's where everybody starts everything. So things change so quickly that sometimes they change quickly, you didn't even realize it was going to happen. So in an environment like that, with the economy and consumers being transformed and changing, with retail still growing but in a different way, with the convergence of channels, what kind of policy challenges have we faced over the past couple of years? Well, so this is straight from our brand story, except they took a couple words out, because it should be passionately advocating for the people, policies, and ideas that help retail thrive. But the truth is the NRF is a lobbying organization. That's why we're in Washington, right, and not Walla Walla. I mean, we're in Washington, D.C. because our number one job is to be advocates. And we say around the office, we've got 125 or 30 staff. All lobbyists are advocates, but not all advocates are lobbyists, right? You don't have to be a lobbyist to be an advocate for retail. Terry's an advocate for retail. What's an advocate? It's a promoter, it's a supporter, it's a champion. That's what the NRF is. We're the champions for retail. That's our number one job. Everything else we do is to lay the foundation to be successful at doing this, which is telling the story of the industry on the most important policy issues that are going to impact the industry, primarily on Capitol Hill and in Washington. So some of the ideas that come out of Washington are very good. Some of the ideas that come out of Washington are not very good. One of the ideas that no one thought was ever going to see the light of day, because a lot of people didn't expect the outcome of the 2016 presidential and congressional elections, was a proposal called the border adjustment tax, which was one element of proposed tax reform. And it was a way to collect a great deal of revenue by disallowing retailers basically to deduct the cost of goods sold that they imported into this country. Not just retailers, anyone that imported anything into this country would no longer get the benefit of deducting the cost of that imported good when they made a sale. That was going to raise billions of dollars over 10 years. That was an existential threat, as our former chairman Steve Sadoff said on a number of occasions when he was doing media, because it would have put many, many, many retailers out of business, including some of the very biggest, not to mention people in the medium and small category. And so in order to try to message that kind of got people's attention, we developed a number of materials, and one of the things we did was try to get out ahead of that particular issue with a video that I think we have, and we could run for you quickly right now.
Too much dough got you feeling low? Too much cash breaking your back? Then you need the BAT tax. The all-new BAT tax is specially designed to make your disposable income disappear. You've got sales tax, property tax, income tax, payroll tax, federal tax, state tax, local tax. Ordinary taxes alone just won't cut it. You need an everything tax like the BAT tax. It'll tax your car, your food, your gas, your medicine, your clothes. You name it, BAT will tax it. That's not all. As a special bonus, we'll include the new job-killing formula for free. You'll get it all, the income-chilling, tax-bringing, job-killing BAT tax. Don't delay, call Congress today. Staffers are standing by. Visit our website at bat.tax to learn more. That's BAT.TAX. The BAT tax. Don't forget, the T stands for tax.
So a lot of this is getting out. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, releases his report. Now there's a battle over who's going to characterize the report this way or this way, right, between people on one side, people on the other side. On the border adjustment tax, it was the exact same thing. Who's going to get out front and characterize it which way? We got out in front and characterized it as a tax on everything. That actor was phenomenal. He came in and did that in one take. We flew him in from LA. In 103 seconds that runs, he says the word tax 37 times. So we branded this as a tax from the beginning, and it was dead. It was dead, dead, dead from the beginning because we called it a tax on consumers. That killed it. And then we ran it on Saturday Night Live because we know there's one person that likes to watch Saturday Night Live. We ran it on Fox and Friends because we know there's one guy that likes to watch Fox and Friends. And we ran it in Palm Beach around Mar-a-Lago. Can ask our communications team. But that was the strategy. And then it went viral. I know Courtney Reagan is here. CNBC, I mean, she and her colleagues tweeted about it. They linked it. It went everywhere. We invested in it, but we didn't invest enough to pay for the earned media that we got. And so that's a story at a couple levels. One is getting out in front of the issue and defining it on behalf of the industry, mobilizing the industry, ensuring we had the resources to do the job we wanted to do. But it's also a story about how the world has changed because you've got a disruptor-in-chief at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can't do things the way you used to do them. And this was an example of doing things in a new way that turned out to be, for us, really, really effective. So after we did that, and we got that killed in the summer of 17, we had to quickly pivot to, we're for tax reform. We were always for tax reform. We just weren't for that particular element of tax reform. And by the time the president signed the bill as a Christmas gift in late December of 2017, many people, including the Wall Street Journal, thought that the retail industry was maybe the biggest winner of any industry in the entire tax reform battle that had been going on since 1986, last time we had tax reform. Because we took care of retailers. We lowered the corporate rate from 35 to 21%. That's good. We helped small businesses. That's disproportionately good for retail. And we helped consumers. And because 70% of economic activity in this country is consumption, that's disproportionately good for retail. So we won 3 out of 3. The retail industry benefited 3 out of 3. And I think we saw the results of that as we went into 2018 and had a very, very good year. One of the other things that we've been working on for a very, very long time was creating some equity and leveling of the playing field, because we're in this period of great convergence between bricks and mortar and online sales and the way in which they get treated when it comes to sales tax collection and remittance. So that we no longer have this disparity where if you were a bricks and mortar retailer, you had to collect it and remit it, but if you were an out-of-state seller, someone purchased it on your website, you did not have to collect and remit, and gave, on average, an instant 10% benefit to the bricks and mortar, or to the online retailer relative to the bricks and mortar retailer. The Supreme Court, after debating this, allowing to stand a decision from 1992, finally last summer, in June of 2018, reversed itself, upheld the constitutionality of a South Dakota law, which is a long way of saying that basically the states are figuring it out now based on the guidance they got from the Supreme Court. I happened to be on an airplane flying to Minneapolis the day this came out, and I didn't have cell service on the plane. And when I landed, my phone just blew up with the Supreme Court's decided, the Supreme Court's decided, the Supreme Court's decided. And I was on my way to see Hubert Joly, the CEO of Best Buy, and I swear, and Hubert is a fabulous guy and effusive and a big smile and very huggy, and I swear when I walked into the lobby, Hubert came down and met me personally, and he gave me an enormous bear hug, and he's a big guy, bigger than I am. But it was like finally, after all these years, we righted this wrong because the world has changed. There's no point in creating this false distinction anymore. That was a very big victory. One of the next, I think, issues we're going to have to deal with, and we are dealing with today, is the issue of privacy and consumer data and how we protect that. Retailers obviously use the information that consumers give them to create better experiences. And if it's about experiences, if you say to a consumer, in return for giving us this information, we're going to give you a better experience, people will say, yes, it's okay with me. I want a better experience. I'm willing to part with this. But people don't want their data used for things that they never agreed to. And that's not a retail issue. That's an issue of our times that's affecting every business in every segment. Terry mentioned Facebook and some other companies. I open up Recode. I don't know how many of you read Recode, but open up today, and the headline was another day, another Facebook privacy problem. There's another announcement: 500 records were stored on a server in Mexico that Amazon maintained, and it was open access, and 550 million consumer records. So that issue is not going to go away. It's going to continue to be a real issue, and we're going to be right in the middle of those discussions in Washington and in Europe, the GDPR, the California privacy law. We're all going to have to contend with that, and it's going to have an impact on the business, and we all need to really pay close attention to it. Now, the last of the advocacy areas I want to talk about is one of the areas with which we did not agree with the president when he campaigned, and that is on trade, particularly because he's got our view, ineffective sort of set of tactics to deal with trade, which is we're going to get into a trade war, we're going to raise barriers to trade, we're going to create tariffs on imported goods, not unlike the border adjustment tax would have done. And that's a serious problem. So as we did with the border adjustment tax, we tried to take a lighthearted approach to telling the story and framing the issue of tariffs by treating observers to a little economics lesson. You may recognize this economics teacher.
Class, today's lesson is about tariffs. Now, tariffs may sound boring, but they're not boring. They're scary. Tariffs raise prices on things Americans buy every day, and we buy a lot of things. Do they work? No, they don't work. Then why are we doing it? Anyone know? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone?
I'm not sure, but my best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from an economist who said that tariffs will raise prices on everything from clothes to cars. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone. That's right.
No problem whatsoever.
Tariffs raise taxes on hardworking Americans. It's not complicated. Trade wars don't work. They never work. It's not just sometimes, they never work. Tariffs are BAD economics. Bad economics. Bad.
Ferris Bueller lives. We had another version that went further that said Donald, Donald, Donald. And that was, we didn't want to pick a fight with the president, so we didn't. That one went viral too, and is out there on YouTube and the internet. The point is, tariffs do cost consumers and our economy a great deal of money. Every month, $1.4 billion. More pressing, since we're not far away from the border with our southern neighbor, is the issue of potentially closing the border. We sent a letter today to the White House. We've got members of our board and CEOs calling the White House, calling members of the administration team. I've had conversations, our team's had conversations telling them what a horribly bad idea it would be to close the border. I was with Senator Rob Portman a couple of days ago. Rob is a senator from Ohio. He's former U.S. trade rep under President Bush in 04 and 05. And Rob said, Matt, this is $1.7 billion every day. 1.7 billion every day comes across our southern border. That's $620 billion a year. That's bigger than the economy of every state in the union except the top 5 or 6 states. It's bigger than most countries. So if we close the southern border, we're making a huge mistake, and we're not setting ourselves up for success as we go forward. And there are real implications for real retailers, and maybe a less lighthearted look is a short video we've got of some of the retailers we brought to town a few months ago to talk to members of Capitol Hill and the administration about the impact of tariffs.
The global impact of these tariffs is already been felt, and it's going to be felt for a while.
The global trade and tariffs have affected my business already. I am seeing price increases. A lot of the factories there have seen what's happening and have already started to raise prices.
It's not just the finished goods product that are impacted, because I might be buying it from a domestic vendor, but if they buy their components from overseas, then those prices are going to go up as well.
Whenever there's a tariff put on something, whenever there's a change in the cost, somebody has to absorb it. So it's going to affect, bottom line, somebody down the chain.
The reality of trying to change production and capacity from the current supply chains that are already established in China, it will take years to change production to other countries or to the United States.
We're getting components from all over the world. I feel like this is a made in the US tax. It's going to make it impossible for me long term to keep my manufacturing in the US.
If business dips, then you look at layoffs or decrease in pay, whatever you need to do to try to be competitive, or do more with less.
We have to absorb the price increases. It's going to take a hit on the bottom line. And it's something that as a small business owner, you just don't have that wiggle room to absorb.
For a small business to not know what is ahead and how we can respond to that, this could be such a detrimental impact on our business.
We take pride in being a core part of our small community, but if we don't have disposable income and or profit that can play there, it's going to have to go into products.
When I hear tariff, I think tax. So it's really a tax on the consumer.
But there just has to be a better way of then taking it out on the consumer.
We need consumer confidence to continue to build. We need a positive environment out there, just some stability for a while.
So, obviously an issue that's not been resolved yet. The president announced there's going to be a summit with President Xi. They're going to announce the trade deal is going to be resolved with China. Maybe the aluminum and steel tariffs will come off that have already cost automakers and consumers billions. I mean, we're not there yet, but the signs are certainly positive, and I think we feel pretty good that we've been able to avoid real direct imposition on consumer goods in these first 3 tranches. But at some point, back to the fact that 70% of the economy is consumption, at some point, if there are going to be tariffs in a real trade war, there's nowhere to go but to put tariffs on consumer goods. So we've avoided many, not all. We'd like to avoid all and position ourselves, again, for some success in the coming year. So thinking about the future, let me just wrap up with a couple of quick thoughts on what we think is going to happen in the next year. You saw the prediction, 3.8 to 4.4 growth. That feels very good to us. We think it's very positive and a real opportunity for continued growth. Consumers are in a good place. Sarah will probably talk about that. Consumer confidence is very high. in relative terms. We ought to be able to continue to let retailers innovate, take advantage of a less regulatory environment, take advantage of the tax code, deliver things that are of value to their customers. We have to avoid self-inflicted mistakes. There are some external factors, right? We can't control what happens with interest rates. We can't control what happens in economies outside the United States. But certainly we can avoid a trade war. We can avoid closing down the southern border. We can avoid shutting down the government. There are things that we can do that are in our control that we can avoid doing to ourselves and shooting ourselves in the foot. But overall, I think we feel like 2019 is going to be a very good year, as long as we can avoid those couple of mistakes. So let me finish with just a couple of comments about our host before I come off the stage. And I just want to say, again, that Terry's back and give you all context. That says 2018. When Terry agreed to come out of his regular life, where he was running an enormous public company with 200,000 employees and 1,000 stores in 2010, Terry had not been waiting 10 years. I can't wait to be the NRF chairman in January of 2010. Terry was approached by my predecessor and a number of members of the board and said, would you please do this? The industry needs you. Now, he was approached with that invitation at a time when the unemployment rate in this country was 10%. So from October of 2009 until April of 2010, the unemployment rate was 9.9 or 10% for 6 months. Highest it had been since 1982. Highest it had been since the Great Depression. Terry's got his own company to run. He doesn't need to come in and chair the National Retail Federation and try to restore an organization that really needed some help, let alone lead a search committee for an organization that was in search of a new CEO. And yet Terry did that. At a time when the NRF didn't have a brand of its own, Terry lent his brand to the NRF. His credibility, his reputation, his relationships. And I am convinced, certainly I personally wouldn't be standing on the stage, but I don't believe that the NRF would have been able to deliver the values it's delivered for its members, some of the things I just outlined, over the past 8 years, if Terry personally had not stepped in and chaired the NRF in 2010. And not only did he do it for 2 years, which is the term, he agreed to a third year, so he did it from 2010 to 2013 to see through some of the things that we started. And I personally, certainly, and my family, but the NRF, and I think the entire retail industry, owe Terry a huge debt of gratitude, because but for Terry, the NRF wouldn't be where it is today and able to deliver the value it does for its members. So Terry, I wanted to say thank you, because I'm on the stage and you can't get me off yet, and you deserve it. So thank you for everything you've done for the NRF and for the industry. And I'm going to just show, so if we go to the next slide, I just want to show you, Terry is a really talented guy, and the picture on the left is a little girl who was about 4.5 years old, sitting through what was then the coldest Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade until 18 was very cold, but this is in 14, and that kid never sat still for 3.5 hours in her life until she sat next to Terry for the parade, and I don't know if she was cold or she was scared, but she sat with him. That's my youngest daughter, Tally, who's now 10. And the other two are in the picture on the right. And I just have to tell you that all the things that Terry can pull off, on the right-hand side, that's the faces of the 3 kids. You can see Terry taking a picture in the background, and Tina back there. That is when Santa comes out at the end of the parade on the 50-yard line, right on 34th Street. And the white confetti is flying, the snowflakes are everywhere, and the turkey's gone through, and the elf has gone through, and Santa shows up. And everyone is screaming, "Hi, Santa, hi, Santa, hi, Santa." And our kids are all going, "Hi, Santa." And Santa looks down at the crowd, and Santa goes, "Hi, Terry." And the kids go, "Oh, my God, he knows Santa Claus." It was priceless. You should see their faces. So we'll finish with the last slide, and that is where I started, which is thank you, Terry. And thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Matt.